A routine flight home turns into a career-ending nightmare for a cocky pilot who chose the wrong woman to bully. He saw a black woman and assumed she didn't belong. He sneered, blocked her path, and refused her entry onto his plane, basking in his fleeting power. What he didn't know, he wasn't just disrespecting a passenger, he was defying Dr. Evelyn Reed, a top FAA official, with the authority to ground his entire career on the spot. He thought he was teaching her a lesson. Instead, he was about to experience the hardest karma of his life. The hum of the airport was a familiar symphony to Dr. Evelyn Reed. For 30 years, the polished floors, the distant announcements, and the scent of jet fuel and Cinnabon had been the backdrop to her life's work. At 58, she was a titan in the aviation world, though you wouldn't know it from her calm demeanor and the simple, elegant pantsuit she wore. Her official title was Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety at the Federal Aviation Administration, a role that placed the security and integrity of the entire American airspace squarely on her shoulders. It was a weight she carried with a quiet, unyielding grace. Today, however, she was just a passenger. She was flying from a conference in Atlanta back to Washington, D.C., on a routine Global Wings air flight. The conference had been a success, a grueling 3 days of panels, keynote speeches, and back-to-back meetings about the next generation of air traffic control systems. It was the kind of work that kept her mind sharp and her passion for aviation alive, but it was draining. All she wanted was to get home to her husband Daniel and spend the weekend tending to her prize-winning roses. She navigated Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with the practiced ease of a seasoned traveler. She bypassed the snaking main security line, using her government credentials to access the expedited lane, a small perk she rarely took for granted. The TSA agents, recognizing the official seal on her ID, greeted her with a respectful, "Good afternoon, ma'am." There was no fuss, no special treatment beyond what her position afforded, which was exactly how she liked it. As she settled into a seat near gate B32, she pulled a well-worn copy of a new regulatory proposal from her briefcase. Her mind, ever active, began parsing the dense legalese, her pen making neat, precise annotations in the margins. This was her process, her way of decompressing by diving deeper into the work that defined her. Evelyn was no stranger to the subtle slights that often accompanied being a black woman in a position of immense power. She had learned early in her career as a young engineer at Boeing to navigate rooms filled with men who underestimated her on sight. She'd endured the surprise that flickered across faces when she was introduced as the lead on a project, the patronizing tones, the assumptions that she was an assistant or a secretary. She had met it all with the same unshakable trifecta: impeccable preparation, unassailable expertise, and a calm, dignified professionalism that left no room for doubt. She didn't have to raise her voice. Her credentials and her track record spoke for themselves, and they spoke volumes. Yet even now, after decades of shattering glass ceilings, the assumptions could still sting. Just last month, at a formal dinner in Brussels, an airline executive had handed her his coat, assuming she was a member of the waitstaff. She had simply smiled, handed the coat back, and said, "I don't think you and I have been properly introduced. I'm Dr. Evelyn Reed." The man's face had turned a shade of crimson she wouldn't soon forget. She didn't dwell on these moments. They were, she reasoned, the friction of progress. Her presence in these spaces was a challenge to a status quo that had existed for generations. But today, tired from the conference, she felt a particular weariness. She looked around the crowded gate area. People from all walks of life, all heading somewhere. It was the great equalizer, the airport, or it was supposed to be. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda with a tight blonde bun and an even tighter smile, made the first boarding announcement. We would now like to begin our pre-boarding process for Global Wings Air Flight 227 to Reagan National. She chirped into the microphone, her voice tinny. We welcome our active duty military personnel families traveling with children under the age of 6 and any passengers requiring special assistance. A few people shuffled forward. Evelyn waited. The next announcement would be for Global Wings elite status flyers and first class. She held a first-class ticket, a necessary indulgence for her frequent work travel that allowed her space to work and rest. Now Brenda announced, we invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Diamond and Platinum Medallion members, to begin boarding. Evelyn closed her briefcase, tucked the regulatory proposal inside, and stood up. She smoothed the front of her jacket and made her way toward the boarding lane, her carry-on rolling silently behind her. She fell in line behind a businessman who was already loudly complaining into his phone about a missed connection. As she approached the podium, a figure stepped forward, blocking her path. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair, a square jaw, and the kind of deep tan that spoke of leisure time spent on boats or golf courses. He wore the crisp, authoritative uniform of a pilot, 4 stripes gleaming on his epaulets. This was the captain. His name tag read J. Miller. He gave Evelyn a dismissive up-and-down glance, his eyes lingering for a moment on her simple attire before a smirk settled on his lips. He turned to the gate agent Brenda and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "Hold on, Brenda," Captain Miller said, holding up a hand to stop Evelyn in her tracks. "We need to make sure the lane is clear for our first-class passengers." He looked directly at Evelyn, his blue eyes cold and challenging. "Ma'am," he said, the word dripping with condescension, "pre-boarding for those needing extra time is over. You'll have to wait for your boarding group to be called." Evelyn stood still, a profound sense of disbelief washing over her. After all these years, after all she had accomplished here, it was, again, the raw, unfiltered assumption. He hadn't looked at her ticket. He hadn't asked. He had simply looked at her, a black woman, and decided she did not belong. The quiet hum of the airport faded, replaced by the thumping of her own heart. The storm had arrived at gate B32. For a moment, Evelyn was frozen, not by intimidation, but by the sheer audacity of the pilot's presumption. The businessman in front of her had already scanned his ticket and moved on. The line behind her had halted. Dozens of eyes were now fixed on the unfolding drama at the podium. Captain Miller stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade radiating an unearned sense of superiority. He wasn't just a pilot. He was the king of this small carpeted kingdom, and he was making it clear that she was an unwelcome peasant. Brenda, the gate agent, looked from the formidable pilot to Evelyn, her expression a mixture of anxiety and deference. It was clear where her allegiance lay. Captain Miller was the ultimate authority on any flight, and his word was law. She nervously wrung her hands, avoiding Evelyn's gaze. Evelyn drew a slow, deliberate breath, centering herself. Panic or anger would serve no purpose here. She had dismantled arguments in congressional hearings and faced down furious union leaders. She would handle this pilot with the same methodical precision. "Sir," she began, her voice even and calm, betraying none of the fury coiling in her gut. "I believe I am in the correct line. I am a first-class passenger." She held up her boarding pass, the bold Class F and Zone 1 clearly visible. Captain Miller didn't even glance at it. His smirk widened into a dismissive grin. Lots of people try to board early, ma'am. The rules are there for a reason. They create an orderly process. Now, if you'll please step aside, you're holding up my actual first-class passengers. He gestured vaguely over her shoulder, as if a throng of more legitimate-looking travelers was being inconvenienced by her presence. The insult was twofold. Not only did she not belong, but she was now an obstruction. "I'm not trying to do anything," Evelyn stated, her voice losing its softness and gaining a steely edge. "I am following the instructions given by your colleague. My ticket grants me Zone 1 boarding. I would appreciate it if you would either look at my ticket or allow me to board." A murmur rippled through the line. A young man in a college sweatshirt a few feet back muttered, "Just look at her ticket, dude." A woman whispered to her husband, "What is his problem?" Captain Miller heard them. The flicker of public dissent seemed to fuel his arrogance rather than temper it. He saw this not as a misunderstanding to be resolved, but as a challenge to his authority that needed to be quashed publicly and decisively. He took a step closer, leaning in, as if sharing a secret, though his voice remained loud. "Look, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe you got that ticket by mistake. Maybe you're confused. But this is my aircraft, and I am responsible for a safe and orderly boarding process. And that process involves you stepping out of this line right now." His eyes were filled with a smug certainty. In his mind, the narrative was clear. He was the hero pilot maintaining order against an unruly passenger trying to game the system. He was so blinded by his prejudice that he couldn't see the reality of the woman standing before him, a woman who could recite federal aviation regulations from memory, a woman who had grounded aircraft for far less egregious breaches of protocol. Brenda, the gate agent, finally found her voice, siding decisively with power. "Ma'am, the captain is right," she said, her tone sharp and impatient. "We can't have everyone trying to bend the rules. Your group will be called in a few minutes. Please step aside." She reached out as if to physically move Evelyn's carry-on a line. Evelyn was not prepared to let her cross. "Do not touch my bag," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. The command was so absolute, so filled with quiet authority, that Brenda's hand recoiled as if burned. Evelyn turned her attention back to the pilot, who seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. "Captain Miller," she said, reading his name tag again, slowly and deliberately. "Let me be perfectly clear. I am a fare-paying passenger in first class. Your refusal to even verify my ticket and your decision to publicly obstruct my boarding based on an assumption is not only unprofessional, it is discriminatory." The word hung in the air, charged and heavy. Discriminatory. Miller's face flushed with anger. The smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of indignant rage. "Now you're pulling the race card." "Unbelievable," he scoffed, throwing his hands up in mock exasperation for the benefit of his audience. "This has nothing to do with race. This is about following procedures. It's about safety." How precisely, Evelyn asked her mind now, in full litigator mode, does a first-class passenger presenting a valid first-class ticket during the first-class boarding call represent a threat to safety? He was cornered by logic, and it made him reckless. "I'm the captain of this flight. My word is final. You are not getting on this plane until I say so. End of story. Now get out of the line before I call airport security." The threat was the final straw. He had escalated this from a display of prejudice to a direct confrontation, threatening her with law enforcement for the crime of attempting to take her rightfully purchased seat. The other passengers were now openly staring, their phones held up, some discreetly, some not. This was no longer just an incident. It was becoming an event. Evelyn looked at Captain Miller, a man so puffed up with his own importance that he was completely oblivious to the cliff he was standing on. She looked at Brenda, who was now nervously whispering into her wrist radio, likely taking the captain's threats seriously. She had given him every chance to de-escalate. She had presented her ticket. She had used logic. She had remained calm in the face of blatant disrespect. Now, a different kind of calculus was required. This was no longer about her personal dignity or the sting of prejudice. Captain J. Miller had, in the course of 2 minutes, demonstrated a shocking lack of judgment, an abuse of authority, and a temperament utterly unsuitable for a person responsible for the lives of 180 souls. This had become a matter of public safety. She reached into her briefcase, her movements calm and measured. But she wasn't reaching for her boarding pass again. She was reaching for the source of her real power. The air at gate B32 was thick with tension. Captain Miller's threat to call security hung between them, a final desperate gambit. He stood, chest puffed out, radiating a belligerent confidence, utterly unaware that he was a man pointing a water pistol at a battleship. Brenda, the gate agent, had her hand on her radio, her eyes wide, waiting for the pilot's signal to summon the authorities. The crowd of passengers watched, phones held aloft like digital torches, a silent jury recording every moment. Evelyn's movements were methodical, devoid of anger or haste. She placed her briefcase on the seat of a nearby chair, clicked open the latches, and pushed aside the file containing the regulatory proposal. Underneath it lay a simple, dark blue leather portfolio. She lifted it out. Miller watched her, a sneer playing on his lips. "What's that going to write me a strongly worded letter? Save your breath. I want you out of this line now." Evelyn didn't respond to his taunt. She opened the portfolio. Inside, nestled in a recessed cutout, was a gold-plated badge in the shape of a shield embossed with an eagle and the seal of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Beside it was an identification card. She took out the ID card and held it up, her thumb firmly planted at the bottom. She angled it so both Captain Miller and Brenda could see it clearly. The photo was a professional headshot, her expression serious and direct. But it was the text that commanded the room. Dr. Evelyn M. Reed, Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety, Federal Aviation Administration. The silence that followed was more profound than any shout. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of Miller's lungs and draining the color from Brenda's face. The pilot's sneer faltered, twitching at the corners before collapsing entirely. He squinted, leaning forward, as if his eyes were deceiving him. He read the title once, then again. Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety. It was one of the most powerful positions in the entire global aviation hierarchy. The person holding that card had the direct authority to ground planes, revoke licenses, and launch investigations that could cripple an entire airline. Brenda's hand dropped from her radio as if it had been struck by lightning. Her jaw went slack, and a low, strangled gasp escaped her lips. I don't—" Miller stammered, his bravado evaporating like mist. His mind was a frantic scramble of denial and dawning gut-wrenching horror. This couldn't be real. It was a joke, a fake ID. It had to be. "Let me assure you," Captain Evelyn said, her voice a blade of pure cold steel, "that my credentials are quite real." She slipped the ID back into its portfolio and then addressed him with chilling formality. "Captain John Miller, certificate number 2814491B. You fly under the authority of the Federal Aviation Administration. My authority." She knew his certificate number. The casual, devastating precision of that fact shattered his last hope of this being a misunderstanding. She wasn't just a high-ranking official. She was an official who was now actively looking at him, seeing not just a pilot, but a data point, a liability, a number to be flagged. In the last 5 minutes, Evelyn continued, her voice resonating with an authority that dwarfed his own. You have demonstrated a reckless disregard for professional conduct. You have abused the captain's authority to harass a passenger. You have made a decision to deny boarding not based on any safety protocol, but on your own personal discriminatory assumptions. And you have escalated a situation that could have been resolved by simply looking at a piece of paper into a threat-laden public spectacle. She took a step closer, and for the first time, Miller flinched back. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. Your temperament, she stated, is volatile. Your judgment is compromised. And your primary motivation appears to be your own ego, not the safety and security of this flight. You have proven right here in front of all these witnesses that you are not fit for command. Not today. She turned her gaze to Brenda, whose face was now a mask of pure terror. And you, madam, have been complicit in this gross failure of procedure and service. Evelyn then looked past them, her voice rising to address the entire gate area, as well as the Global Wing staff who were now emerging from the jet bridge, drawn by the commotion. As the ranking FAA official on site, I am exercising my regulatory authority. Global Wing's Air Flight 237 to Washington Reagan is hereby grounded. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This aircraft will not depart until a full on-site review is conducted and a new flight crew is assigned. Captain Miller, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Surrender your airline credentials to the station manager. It was a public execution of a career. Miller stood swaying slightly, his face ashen. The tan he had sported so proudly now looked like a sickly yellow veneer. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had built his world on the foundation of those 4 stripes on his shoulder, and she had just stripped them away in front of everyone. From the back of the line, someone started to clap. It was the young man in the college sweatshirt. Then another person joined, and another. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, but a scattered, stunned applause from passengers who had just witnessed a bully receive the most direct and spectacular comeuppance imaginable. The clicks and flashes of phone cameras intensified, capturing the pilot's utter ruin for posterity and for the internet. The applause died down, replaced by an excited, frantic buzz. Passengers were no longer just watching. They were narrating the events into their phones in hushed, urgent tones. You will not believe what just happened. The pilot just got fired on the spot. She's from the FAA, 2 airport police officers, a stern-faced man, and a younger, more cautious-looking woman arrived on the scene. They had likely been summoned by Brenda's earlier aborted call and were prepared to deal with a disruptive passenger. Instead, they found a gate area in chaos, a pilot who looked like he'd seen a ghost, and a gate agent who seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. "What's the situation here?" the male officer asked, his hand resting on his belt. Before a still, catatonic Miller or Brenda could answer, a man in a sharp suit hurried through the crowd, his face pale with panic. His name tag identified him as David Chen, the Global Wing's station manager. He had clearly been alerted by one of his staff and had run all the way from the airline's lounge. He was sweating and out of breath. He didn't even see the police at first. His eyes were locked on Dr. Evelyn Reed. Unlike Miller, he recognized her instantly. He'd seen her picture in dozens of industry circulars and FAA bulletins. He knew precisely who she was, and the sight of her standing at his gate amidst this scene struck him with a terror that went far beyond a simple flight delay. This was a corporate cataclysm. Dr. Reed Chen breathed, his voice trembling. He pushed past the officers, his hands held up, in a gesture of placating surrender. "I am so sorry. I am David Chen, the station manager. I cannot begin to apologize for what I just heard happened here. It is unacceptable, inexcusable." Evelyn gave him a curt nod. "Mr. Chen, your apology is noted. Your pilot, Captain Miller, has created a significant safety and regulatory issue." Chen turned to Miller, his expression shifting from terror to incandescent fury. "John, what have you done?" he hissed under his breath. Miller finally found his voice, a weak, reedy thing. She wouldn't listen. "I was maintaining order." "Maintaining order?" Chen's voice cracked. "You just got one of our flagship routes grounded by the deputy administrator of the FAA, you moron." The police officers exchanged a confused glance. The male officer addressed Chen. "Sir, we had a call about a passenger refusing to—" "There is no issue with the passenger." Chen cut him off, his voice strained. He turned to Evelyn. "Dr. Reed is a distinguished guest and a valued first-class customer. The issue," he said, turning his glare back to Miller and Brenda, "is a catastrophic failure of judgment by my staff. Officers, your services will not be needed, thank you. We have this under control." He was lying, of course. Nothing was under control. Chen turned to Brenda, who was now openly crying, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "Brenda, go to my office. Now. Don't talk to anyone. Just go." She nodded numbly and scurried away like a frightened mouse escaping the public glare. Then he faced his pilot. "John, your credentials. Now." It wasn't a request. Miller looked down at the ID clipped to his shirt pocket, the plastic card that had been his key to the kingdom. His hands shook as he fumbled to unclip it. He held it out to Chen, not meeting his eyes. It was the physical act of surrender, the final humiliating transfer of power. "You're suspended pending a full investigation," Chen said, his voice low and guttural. "An escort will take you to a private office. You will wait there. Do not leave. Do not talk to the press. Do you understand me?" Miller gave a weak, pathetic nod. His reign was over. The square jaw, the arrogant smirk, the aura of command, it had all been a fragile facade, and it had crumbled into dust. As a ground crew member, quietly escorted the now former captain away from the gate, a few passengers booed. With the immediate culprits removed, Chen turned his full attention back to Evelyn, his posture one of complete and utter contrition. "Dr. Reed, on behalf of Global Wings Air, I am profoundly sorry. We will of course comply with all FAA directives. We will arrange a new crew immediately. We will find transportation for you, a private car, another airline, a chartered jet if necessary. Whatever you want, it's yours." Evelyn held up a hand. "Mr. Chen, this isn't about my personal travel arrangements. This is now an official incident. I'll need your full cooperation, the flight data recorder, and written statements from all involved crew. I will be filing a formal report." She paused, then added, "And I will take my assigned seat on this plane, once you have found a captain who understands that his or her job is to fly it safely, not to police it based on prejudice." She was making a point. She wasn't going to be shuffled off or given special treatment now. She was going to see this through. She would take this flight not as a VIP, but as the passenger she had been all along. Chen could only nod, a fresh wave of sweat beading on his forehead. The videos from the gate were already hitting social media, multiplying like cancer cells. He knew this wasn't just an incident anymore. It was a story that was about to cost his company millions of dollars and a world of goodwill it could never get back. The karma for Captain Miller's actions was just beginning, and it was going to be brutal. While David Chen scrambled to contain the blast radius at Gate B32, the shrapnel was already blanketing the internet. The first video shot by the college student hit Twitter less than 10 minutes after Miller was escorted away. It was shaky, the audio slightly muffled, but the content was explosive. It was captioned, "Racist Global Wings pilot gets instant karma from FAA official he refused to let board." Unbelievable. Flying while black/karma at the gate. The video started with Miller's condescending line, "You'll have to wait for your boarding group to be called." It captured Evelyn's calm, steely responses, Miller's escalating aggression, and the jaw-dropping moment she presented her credentials. The clip ended with her grounding the flight and the scattered stunned applause. It was a perfect self-contained narrative of hubris and comeuppance. Within 30 minutes, it had 100,000 views. An hour in it was over 1 million. News aggregators, bloggers, and major media outlets began to pick it up. The hashtag started trending nationally. Other passengers began uploading their own videos from different angles, each one adding a new layer to the story. One video shot from the side clearly showed Miller's dismissive up-and-down glance at Evelyn, a visual confirmation of the prejudice that had started the whole affair. The headquarters of Global Wings Air in Dallas, Texas, went into what was internally known as Code Red. The CEO, a slick, silver-haired executive named Mark O'Connell, was pulled out of a board meeting. His communications team was already in a war room, screens filled with the exploding social media feeds, and the plummeting GWA stock price in after-hours trading. "Get me Chen in Atlanta," O'Connell barked into his phone, "and get me everything we have on this pilot John Miller. Everything. I want to know if he's ever had so much as a complaint for jaywalking." Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless office near the Atlanta Airport's operations center, John Miller sat staring at a beige wall. His phone had been buzzing incessantly for the last hour. The first call he'd taken was from his union rep, a gruff, world-weary man named Frank. "Johnny, what the hell did you do?" Frank had asked, his voice strained. "Frank," she was out of line. She pulled the race card. She was causing a scene. Miller's voice was a desperate, cracking plea. "Shut up, John, just shut up," Frank had cut him off. "I'm watching the video right now. The whole world is watching the video. You didn't just step in it, you built a house in it. Don't talk to anyone else, not your wife, not your buddies, and especially not the press. I'll get a lawyer on the line, but I've got to be honest, son. This looks unsurvivable. Unsurvivable." The word echoed in the silent room. Miller finally unlocked his phone and opened Twitter. His hands trembled as he saw his own face twisted in a smug sneer, staring back at him from dozens of thumbnails. He saw his name. He saw the comments. "Arrogant racist. Deserved everything he got. Hope he never flies again." He felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just lost his command today. He'd lost his anonymity. He had become a meme, a villain, in a story being told to millions. His life as he knew it was over. Back at the gate, things had slowly been brought under some semblance of order. David Chen had arranged for snacks and drinks to be brought out for the delayed passengers, a futile gesture of goodwill. He treated Evelyn with a reverence usually reserved for royalty, repeatedly asking if she needed anything, which she politely declined every time. Evelyn herself was a picture of composure. She had found a quiet corner and was on the phone with her own boss, the administrator of the FAA in Washington. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice low and professional. "The situation is contained. The flight is grounded." "No, I'm fine. The station manager has been cooperative." "Of course, I'll have the preliminary report on your desk by morning. We'll need to launch a formal review of the airline's training protocols on Code of Federal Regulations, Part 121, specifically regarding crew interference and passenger rights." "Yes, sir. I agree. It indicates a potential systemic issue." She was no longer just a passenger. She was back in her role, her mind already working 3 steps ahead, seeing the wider implications. This wasn't just about one arrogant pilot anymore. It was about the culture that created him. After about 2 hours, a new flight crew arrived. A somber-looking captain, a man in his late 50s with kind eyes, approached Evelyn before heading to the plane. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice full of respect. "I'm Captain Evans. I'll be flying you to DC. I just want to say, on behalf of all the pilots who do this job, with the professionalism it requires, I am deeply sorry for what you experienced today." Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time since the ordeal began, offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Captain Evans. I appreciate that. Let's get these people home." As she finally walked down the jet bridge, the other passengers in the newly formed line watched her with awe. She hadn't been seeking a fight, but when one was brought to her, she had finished it, with the full weight of the law and a lifetime of hard-earned authority. The digital wildfire raged on. But for Dr. Evelyn Reed, the next step was simply getting on the plane and flying home. The incident at Gate B32 was no longer just a viral video. It had become a federal case. The moment Evelyn's report landed on the FAA administrator's desk, a series of unforgiving bureaucratic gears began to turn. An official letter of investigation was sent to Global Wings Air CEO Mark O'Connell, a document that carried the legal weight of a court summons. The airline was legally required to cooperate fully or face the immediate suspension of its operating certificate. In Washington, D.C., Evelyn led the primary review. It was a cold, methodical process, stripped of the raw emotion of the gateside confrontation. Her team impounded the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder from Flight 227. They began a deep dive into John Miller's entire career history. What they found painted a damning picture. Miller was a competent pilot in a technical sense, but his file was peppered with minor red flags that individually had been dismissed. There were 2 informal passenger complaints over the past 5 years, citing his arrogant and dismissive attitude. There was a note from a flight attendant union rep about his condescending communication style with cabin crew. There was even a flag from his last simulator review that mentioned a tendency to become defensive under simulated high-stress scenarios. Each was a single colored thread, but when woven together by Evelyn's investigators, they formed a tapestry of a man with a clear authority complex, a man wholly unsuited for the immense responsibility of an airline captain. The legal team for Global Wings Air, led by a high-priced DC law firm, knew they had no defense. The video evidence was absolute. Their strategy was not to fight, but to prostrate themselves before the FAA in the most convincing way possible. O'Connell flew to Washington to meet with Evelyn and the administrator in person. In the sterile FAA conference room, O'Connell was a changed man from the brash CEO he usually portrayed. He was humble, apologetic, and visibly shaken. "Dr. Reed, there are no words to express how sorry we are," he began. Captain Miller's actions were an abhorrence. "They do not represent the values of Global Wings Air. We have terminated his employment as well as that of the gate agent Brenda Prentice. We are prepared to do whatever it takes to make this right." Evelyn listened, her face impassive. "Mr. O'Connell," she replied, her tone level, "this is not about one pilot. This is about a corporate culture that allowed that pilot to feel so emboldened. Your training, your oversight, your systems, they all failed. They failed to identify a problem pilot, and they failed to protect a passenger from discriminatory abuse." The verdict from the FAA was swift and harsh. John Miller's airman certificate was revoked on the grounds of violating Federal Aviation Regulation 9.13, which prohibits operating an aircraft in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another. The FAA lawyers successfully argued that his discriminatory actions and abuse of authority constituted a reckless endangerment of the order and safety required for flight operations. He would never legally captain a commercial aircraft in the United States again. For Global Wings Air, the punishment was financial and systemic. The FAA levied a fine of $1.75 million, the maximum allowable for the specific violations. More significantly, the airline was placed under a 3-year consent decree. This legally binding agreement mandated a complete overhaul of their customer service and crew resource management training programs with a new curriculum designed and approved by the FAA. It would cost the company tens of millions in implementation and lost productivity. The Miller incident, as it was now called, would be the primary case study in the new training modules, a permanent institutionalized reminder of their failure. The pilots' union, which had initially made noise about defending Miller, quietly backed away. Frank, the union rep, knew a lost cause when he saw one. The evidence was too public, too damning. Defending Miller would be political suicide and would tarnish the reputation of all the pilots they represented. They issued a public statement condemning his actions and affirming their commitment to professionalism and safety. John Miller was left completely, utterly alone. 6 months later, the chill of autumn had settled over the country, but for the individuals at the center of the Gate B-52 firestorm, the seasons had ceased to matter. The news cycle, with its fleeting memory, had long since moved on to other outrages and sensations. But life, unlike the news, does not forget. The consequences of that single 2-minute encounter continued to ripple outwards, reshaping destinies with the slow grinding force of tectonic plates. John Miller's new world was one of shadows and anonymity. In the immediate aftermath, he had been defiant. "They can't do this to me," he'd raged at his union-appointed lawyer. "It was a misunderstanding. I'm a 30-year veteran." He genuinely believed it. He saw himself as the victim of an overzealous bureaucrat and a politically correct mob. He applied to other smaller airlines, even charter companies, convinced his skills would speak for themselves. The rejections were swift and cold. No one would touch him. His name was now a red flag on any background check, a permanent stain in the FAA database. His picture was forever archived online, a digital monument to arrogance. His colleagues, the men with whom he'd shared cockpit silences and post-flight beers, fell silent. Calls went unreturned. The camaraderie of the skies did not extend to the disgraced on the ground. The most painful schism, however, happened within the walls of his own sprawling suburban home. His wife, Patricia, A woman who had built her social life around being a pilot's wife could not endure the shame. The condescending pity in the eyes of her friends at the country club, the whispers in the grocery store, it was a constant, humiliating assault. Their arguments became venomous. "You and your ego," she screamed at him one night. "You just couldn't stand to see a black woman in first class, could you? You had to be the big man, and you ruined us." He threw back accusations of disloyalty, but her words struck a chord of truth he couldn't bear to acknowledge. She left a week later. The divorce was financially crippling. To pay her settlement and his mounting legal fees, he sold the house with its manicured lawn, then the boat that had been his weekend sanctuary. Finally, the luxury sedan went. His life of command and comfort was liquidated piece by piece. The last anyone in his old life heard John Miller was working for a third-party logistics contractor driving a dented white cargo van on the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift. He, a man who once commanded a 50-ton jet through the stratosphere, was now hauling pallets of auto parts and boxes of office supplies through the deserted rain-slicked streets of a city that was fast asleep. One night, while loading his van at a warehouse, a security guard did a double take. "Hey, you're that pilot from the news, right?" he asked, not with malice, but with simple curiosity. John just turned away, pulling his baseball cap lower, forever grounded by the unbearable weight of his own hubris. Brenda Prentice, the gate agent, found her life diminished to a smaller, quieter scale. Fired by Global Wings, she was effectively blacklisted from the airline industry she had loved. The name Brenda from the viral videos was generic enough to offer a sliver of anonymity, but any potential employer in the travel sector who did their due diligence would find the connection. After dozens of failed interviews, she took a job as a receptionist at a sprawling dental practice in a neighboring town. The tight professional smile she had once deployed to manage gate lice and boarding queues was now used to greet patients with abscesses and root canals. The work was steady, but the glamour was gone. There were no flight benefits, no bustling airports, no sense of being connected to a wider world. In her quiet moments between scheduling appointments, she was haunted by the memory of Dr. Reed's calm, unwavering gaze. She replayed the scene, endlessly realizing her true failure wasn't just backing the wrong person. It was her own passivity, her ingrained deference to a uniform over a person. It was a costly lesson in the price of silence. For Global Wings Air, the incident was a financial and cultural hemorrhage. The $1.75 million FAA fine was just the beginning. The legally mandated consent decree forced a top-to-bottom reimagining of their employee training, costing the company an estimated $40 million in consulting fees, new materials, and lost man-hours. Every single one of their 12,000 frontline employees, pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, was required to attend a mandatory full-day seminar titled Lessons from Flight 227, Unconscious Bias and Authority. The centerpiece of the seminar was the video itself, played on a large screen in hotel conference rooms across the country. Watching John Miller's sneering face become the corporate symbol for what not to do was a surreal and uncomfortable experience for the staff. A quiet tension filled the rooms as they watched the public evisceration of a former colleague. The name Dr. Evelyn Reed was now spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence, a legendary boogeyman for misbehaving staff. The incident had become an institutional cautionary tale, more effective at reforming behavior than 1,000 corporate memos, and Dr. Evelyn Reed, she found herself occupying an unexpected new space in the public consciousness. She was still first and foremost the deputy administrator, working with the same quiet intensity that had defined her career. But she was now also a symbol. She was featured in Forbes and interviewed by national news anchors, not just about safety regulations, but about leadership diversity and the exercise of power. She deftly pivoted every interview away from the personal drama of the incident and toward the systemic issues it revealed. At a major Women in Aviation conference in Chicago, she stood before an auditorium of 2,000 people. The authority vested in a pilot's uniform or in a corporate title or in a government badge is not a right. It is a profound public trust, she said, her voice resonating with calm conviction. That trust is violated when it is used not to ensure safety, but to enforce personal prejudice. The challenge for our industry is to build systems that are more resilient than the biases of any single individual. She spoke of creating pipelines for more women and people of color to enter flight schools and executive tracks, arguing that a more diverse industry is inherently a safer and stronger one. The standing ovation was thunderous. She was turning a moment of personal degradation into a movement. One crisp Saturday afternoon, she was in her garden, her sanctuary carefully pruning the last of her prize-winning Queen Elizabeth roses before the first frost. Her husband Daniel came out onto the stone patio holding a single piece of mail. "This one isn't from the FAA or the White House," he said, a warm smile in his voice. Evelyn wiped the soil from her hands and took the envelope. It was addressed simply to Dr. E. Reed, Washington, D.C., forwarded from her office. The handwriting was neat and hopeful. Inside, on a single sheet of lined paper, was a letter. "Dear Dr. Reed, my name is Brianna Jones. I am a 22-year-old senior in the aerospace engineering program at Tuskegee University. For as long as I can remember, I have dreamed of flying. My bedroom walls are covered in pictures of planes, from the P-51 Mustang flown by the Tuskegee Airmen to the 787 Dreamliner. But alongside that dream, there has always been a quiet, persistent fear about the challenges I would face as a black woman in that world. 6 months ago, I saw the video from the Atlanta airport. I watched it probably a dozen times. I saw how that pilot tried to make you small, how he tried to erase you. And I saw how you responded. You never yelled. You never lost your composure. You simply stood on the foundation of your own excellence and let your life's work speak for you. You didn't just win an argument. You affirmed that people like us belong in those spaces, and not just belong, but can and will hold positions of ultimate authority. That day, something inside me shifted. My fear didn't vanish, but my determination grew larger than the fear. I am writing to you today from the library at Maxwell Air Force Base. I have been accepted into the U.S. Air Force Officer Training School with a guaranteed slot in their pilot program. I wanted to thank you. You may have been grounding one man's career that day, but you were giving thousands of girls like me permission to fly." Evelyn looked up from the letter, her eyes glistening. She thought of John Miller in his cargo van, a lonely figure in the pre-dawn darkness. She thought of the multi-million-dollar training seminars and the grudging compliance of an airline. Those were just punishments, the logical consequences of a bad decision. They were karma's accounting. But this she thought, holding the letter to her chest. This was karma's poetry. This was the real victory. It wasn't the satisfying sting of comeuppance that mattered most. It was the quiet, profound promise of a new dawn, inspired by one woman's simple refusal to be erased. She looked up at the sky, a perfect, brilliant blue, and watched a plane carve a white contrail across it. She folded the letter carefully, her heart full, and turned back to her roses. There was still so much work to be done. The story of Dr. Wet. Evelyn Reed and Captain Miller isn't just about a single moment of drama at an airport gate. It's a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences and that true authority comes not from a uniform, but from integrity, intelligence, and a lifetime of dedication. It shows that standing up to prejudice, no matter how small or casual it seems, can create ripples of change that empower and inspire others in ways we can't even imagine. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to see that karma is real and that quiet strength can be the most powerful voice of all. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama justice and the incredible people who refuse to back down. Thank you for watching.